Welcome to the Startup Canada podcast, a weekly show serving Canada's entrepreneurship community. I'm your host, Rick Spence, business journalist, editor, public speaker, and entrepreneur. After 15 years as the national entrepreneurship columnist at the National Post, and as the former editor and publisher of Profit, the magazine for Canadian entrepreneurs, I've learned what makes Canadian startups special, scalable, and successful. On this show, we connect you with Canada's most innovative and entrepreneurial leaders and changemakers. You'll meet the people driving the entrepreneurial movement, and we'll share their first-person adventures and their tips, hacks, and best advice for running startup and growth companies. The Startup Canada podcast is a production of Startup Canada, the national rallying community for Canada's 3.5 million entrepreneurs. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher, and anywhere else you listen to your podcasts. To entrepreneurs everywhere, this is your show. Entrepreneurs from coast to coast to coast, welcome to the Startup Canada podcast. In honor of Pride Month, the Startup Canada Podcast Network is celebrating the contributions and achievements of LGBT plus entrepreneurs. Join us as we chat with LGBT plus founders and support organizations who are challenging the status quo to build a more inclusive world. Today on the show, we're thrilled to have Connie Stacey. Connie is the founder and president of Edmonton-based Growing Greener Innovations. She holds a BA from the University of Alberta and brings 20 years of experience from the IT and computer programming sectors to her work at GGI. Connie founded the company in 2014 to create a better generator, silent, no fumes, no carbon emissions. Upon developing the patented Grengen solar battery generator, she expanded her design into the battery storage sector. Connie serves on the steering committee of the Centre for Grid Innovation at the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology. She's received Global Woman of Vision and World Changing Women Awards, and she was named to this year's Top 50 Changemakers list by the Globe and Mail. Connie, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
Delighted to have you here. Before we get started, the etiquette here is that we try and assure that our entrepreneurial audience is going to learn a lot from every podcast. So we'll start off by asking what top pieces of advice that you hope entrepreneurs will take away from our conversation today.
Blue and green, you'll never be seen. We're not talking fashion. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah, I'm not the one to ask fashion advice for, so we'll skip that one. Best advice from an entrepreneur-specific place would be know that you have a customer for your product. So often entrepreneurs start out and they have a great idea, but they haven't really taken the time to know, is there somebody who's going to pay the price for that product or service, And that one in particular, I find is where a lot of companies end up failing is they underestimate the consumer's interest in buying the product. So that would probably be the first really big one I can think of. The other is stick it out. There is just so many people who get so tired because it is an incredibly onerous process. It's long, it's hard. You will face a lot of challenges. So you just really have to stick it through.
Right. Those are both great pieces of advice. Let me just explore that second one for a sec. Tell me about a time that you stuck it out when normal people would have said, oh, the hell with this. Let's go get a job.
Oh, now that's a long list. You know what? We had, this really leads into a lot of our topic today, but one of the things that was a real challenge for me was at the beginning, unconscious bias really played a tough role for me. And I say unconscious because I do believe that a lot of the people I were talking to were by no means sexist or homophobic. But they had conceptions or preconceptions about what a battery manufacturer looked like. And guess what? Battery manufacturers don't usually look like a middle-aged gay woman. Who knew, right? I mean, I thought there'd be a lineup. It turns out that whenever I go to a conference, I have the women's bathroom entirely to myself. It's a beautiful thing. It's like an echo. So for me, a lot of times, it was kind of not one event, but there were so many times where I faced comments of, I just don't see innovation here, or I don't see a market for your product. well, now Missy, I think you should XYZ, right? And there were so many little things like that where people just didn't see me manufacturing batteries. And I mean, women in deep tech is uncommon. Women in deep tech manufacturing is pretty much unheard of. And one of the kind of comical things of this is, and this wasn't by intent, but we've recently filled out more of our executive team, and it's all women. So that was a bit ironic. I feel like that in the end, we ended up with an all-female team.
And I presume that's because you were looking for the best people to fill the jobs.
Yeah, I was. In fact, there was one person I had known from my career previously that I brought in, and that was our Vice President of Marketing Communications. But both our VP Finance and our VP Ops were recommendations from other groups. And VP Ops in particular was a great steal. She was the Director of Engineering for the City of Edmonton. And, rumor had it through a friend that she might be looking. And when I met her, I knew, wow, she is totally my opposite. Perfect.
What do you mean by your opposite?
Well, I think one of the things with being an entrepreneur is you really do have to have a certain appetite for risk, I think is probably the best way to put it. I can't imagine someone truly being successful in something, startup, in new technology, any of this stuff where there is so much risk. There's so many unknown things. I mean, when I built our system, it's a patented technology. Well, guess what? It had never been built before. We didn't know if we could do it. So that's a lot of risk. And one of the things that's so amazing about Anjum, our VP operations, is she's so thorough, so grounded, so like dot the I's, cross the T's, you're going to get it done.
Right. So she's the detail-oriented, reliable person that everyone can depend upon and go to for help.
Oh, absolutely. We'll be in meetings with...
While you're knocking the walls down.
Yeah, and she's looking at me like, please don't speak. I'm going to have to fill this. I'm going to have to do whatever it is you say. So please don't say anything too extreme. I can see the look in her eyes, and it's beautiful.
And you know what? I'm glad you brought that up, because I agree with you that every business with any type of ambition has to have both types of people. It's got to have the chargers ahead, the movers, the shakers, but it's also got to have the details people who can keep it all together. Put a restraining hand on the shoulder from time to time, and also know when not to put a restraining hand on the shoulder. So it's great that you found that out.
Yeah, and honestly, like in particular with the finance person, I very flatly said to her, I brought you on to argue with me, because I know that there's a balance between risk and profit, right? I mean, you can risk and you need to a certain degree, but you also have to be realistic about those risks and cautious, or your business does not survive. So, I mean, and she's wonderful. I absolutely love this woman. She's very pragmatic. She's like, why? This is a question I get all the time. Why? Just everything we do. Do we have to have someone that costs that much? Why? It's wonderful, and it's challenging, and it's the way it should be.
I'm going to regret bringing this up. It sounds a little bit like the crew of the original Starship Enterprise, because for every Kirk, you need a Spock to be the rational person, and maybe even Dr. McCoy to add a little empathy.
Damn it, Jim! I'm a doctor, not an engineer. Absolutely. You do. You really do need a balanced team. And that was something that I've been really excited about in this last year as we filled out our executive in particular. We've had such amazing luck in the last couple of years. As things started to turn, we've been able to pick up some amazing people on our team, specialists in battery technology that are really quite hard to find. And lo and behold, didn't they turn out to be awesome people? And that's not always the case. So, we're pretty lucky, and it's been quite the ride.
That's fantastic. Well, let's get back to talking about that ride, because we didn't really introduce Growing Green fully or talk about your entrepreneurial journey. So tell me a little bit about your quest to end energy poverty and how that turned into portable battery technology and Growing Green innovations.
Yeah, well, obviously, if you're going to end world poverty and energy poverty, you should make batteries. You don't see the connection? So one of the things that it kind of actually started, my twin boys, I have three kids, and the twin boys are older, and they were about 3 months old when I walked by a house being built, and they had a diesel generator running, and I thought, if you wake these babies, I swear to God. Like, I plowed through and they didn't wake up, thankfully. And I was thinking about this. Why do we use these things? They're horrible. They're loud. They're expensive. They're terrible in the environment. Nobody enjoys working around a diesel generator. And that was part of what kind of got me thinking, well, is there alternative opportunities for portable power? And that was really where it began. But when it really took shape and where it really kind of took off, and I guess I opted with the burn the ships and really dive into it, was when I realized what the global energy poverty looked like. I mean, in Canada, we are so fortunate. We have one of the most stable grids on the planet. And I know sometimes you groan because we get outages, but when you compare it to other parts of the world, it's just night and day. A lot of people don't realize. I'm going to hit you with three crazy numbers. One, there's more than 1 billion people in the world who have zero access to energy. That means they're using candlelight only, right? Nothing, not even light. Two, there are 2.6 billion people in the world who do not have enough energy to cook in any way other than burning something. So often that's a biomass. It can even be garbage and feces. And to say that it's horrible on health and the environment is an understatement. That's 2.6 billion people. And then when you get to what's called domestic energy poverty, you're talking about half the world's population. And domestic energy poverty is you have such rampant outages, or you only have power for certain hours of the day, or it's completely unreliable, that it's considered domestic energy poverty. And that's half the world. I mean, we're talking about basically 4 billion people. And that's something that a lot of Canadians, I think, just really have a hard time wrapping their head around.
Tell us about the Grengen. How does it's basically a solar battery, I guess, but you've come up with it as a consumer product. Tell me about that journey.
Sure. It actually started for me. I started from the opposite end of the design process. I started with the end consumer, and I picked the hardest consumers to fulfill. So I said, if I'm a woman with a child and no spouse, and I live in rural area in sub-Saharan Africa, how on earth do I get that person power? And what does their life look like? Because I knew if I can solve that problem, I can probably solve a lot of the other problems. And one of the things I did is I kind of went through, well, what do they need truly? Right? So forget about grid, forget about transmission lines, all of that stuff for a moment. Just what does that person need? And basically, there were three key things. One, they needed whatever it was, and this is probably the most important part, to be plug and play, truly plug and play. Lots of people like to say, oh, our systems are modular, or they're plug and play, as long as you have an electrician or an engineer. So that's not actually how that works when we say plug and play. So we knew it had to be plug and play because this person isn't living next door to an electrician or an engineer. So even if they have equipment, this is crucial. Second, it had to be portable. Lots of people in the world are walking to work or find water or food or shelter on an ongoing basis. So it had to be portable and lightweight. And finally, it had to be scalable. So one of the things, and it is very similar to what happens with computers, but we have what's called a watt addiction. So we constantly have our energy demands going up, particularly electric these days, because as we're bringing on more electric devices because of climate change. So it's an important thing that we do, but it does have repercussions in the greater kind of scheme. So when I thought about that kind of bigger picture, I said, I have to solve these three issues. There were certain things I noticed. First off, it had nothing.
Let me stop you there for a sec.
Sure.
So you decided to create a product for essentially the developing world where people have no money and need, as you say, total plug and play. It sounds like you made this as hard as possible for yourself.
For sure. I mean, that's pretty much how I grew up.
Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you say, let's go after campers and cottagers and people with their shacks up in the north?
Honestly, and this kind of, again, comes back to, being Pride Month and all of that kind of stuff. But, I didn't have it easy. I had it hard. Maybe it wasn't because of energy, but I had it hard for other reasons. And it wasn't my goal in life to make it easier for people who already have it easy. I'd like to make it an environmental impact and have those campers and construction companies and stuff like that using a cleaner product. But my goal in life is to help people achieve more equality. And we're so far from it in so many parts of the world. So, making it easier for the folks going camping, great, not as high a priority for me.
Wow. So tell me, long story short, how did you develop the product? How long has it been, and who's buying it?
So it's been a long process. So one of the things that, a lot of people, I guess from the consumer perspective, and it's important that it's this way, they just see that they can click things together like Lego. Oh, cool. Well, that doesn't seem hard. And that's good. It shouldn't seem hard from their perspective. But from our perspective in developing it, there was a ton of technical things that had to be considered and built into the system. So one of those things is around the idea of we don't know what the input source is going to be. Is it going to be a hand crank or a hydro dam or the grid? So it could be tiny, tiny trickle of energy, or it could be an overabundance. There might be one battery in the stack, or there could be 1,000. And you didn't know what the output was going to be. So are they running one cell phone or an entire city? So that led us to a lot of work in trying to figure out how do we create the electronics so that they're safe and we can allow this plug and play, because effectively we're taking the engineer and electrician out of the equation, or as I like to put it, we're putting them in the box where all engineers should be.
Right. When did you start on this journey? When did you have a product on the market?
Well, we had our first kind of modified product, which is much more of a more common, it's not super common, but a more common solar generator, our little ultralight. That was the first one we released. And we had our first kind of production run in 2018. And a lot of it did go to people with interest in hunting and camping, needed it for CPAP machines. Things like that. That was definitely a good fit for that one, but it's quite small. So, and small by Canadian standards. So we are kind of big on power around here. And, we think that something that runs your cell phone and a laptop.
And a chainsaw.
Yeah. We kind of have some expectations that might be a little bit higher than other parts of the world. So for around here, it's definitely considered small. And it has been mostly Canada and the US that have bought those smaller units. And now we have other ones that are going to be released basically in the next 12 months, it looks like. So we actually were lucky about, mid-2018, we submitted our technology into a contest by the U.S. Department of Defense, and we won an innovation award. And that actually was probably one of the biggest turning points for us. Even though it wasn't a cash award, we didn't have a contract with them, but they have a reputation. And when people think about the U.S. military or the U.S. Department of Defense, I'm sure they have many thoughts, but one of them is certainly that, they know tech, and they buy really expensive tech. They buy the best of the best, typically. So for a lot of people, they kind of went, well, maybe there's something here after all. And so they started to look at us a little bit differently. And one of the things that later came was we were able to get our first Canadian Department of Defense contract. And the Canadian Department of Defense right now is going through a big process of trying to clean up their Environmental Act. So reduce the footprint of their camps and their bases and stuff like that. So that's part of what we're participating in right now. So now these units that are coming out are much more of that patented technology.
Right. Are you serving, that sub-Saharan customer that you had in mind at first?
Not yet, or we hope to. We do have a contract pending that is to help the rural electrification of Northeast India, and it's 40,000 homes, so it's extremely exciting. But of course, COVID right now it's just been doing such a number on India in the past while. So things in that area have been temporarily put on hold. We're hoping that it is in fact temporary and that they will be continuing, but obviously they have some urgent issues to deal with.
Right. So sum it up for me a little bit. How many units have you sold? Where does one buy them? And what's next?
Okay, so How many units have we sold? I actually have to check with one of my staff. So
We're
let's
talking
say
hundreds or thousands or billions?
it would be in the hundreds so far, soon to hopefully be in the thousands. In fact, we have some new contracts coming up that should definitely put it into the thousands. In terms of, what was the second question? Oh, short-term memory.
Where do we buy them? Are they in the Canadian Tire catalog yet?
Yeah, no, the small ones right now are just mostly available online. There are a few retailers across Canada that are carrying them, but this unit is kind of not our flagship, so we haven't pushed it quite as hard. So usually on our website is the easiest spot.
Right. And just to be clear, they're like $400 or something, right?
Yeah. It depends on, do you want a combination where it gets like with the folding solar panel and things like that. And but yeah, they're great little, like, especially if you're camping and you're a tent camper or tent trailer, little tow along units that are small. They're a great little companion for that because you might not always have power, but let's face it, we don't often go without our phones. So we have, for those digital type of things, are a great fit.
But this is about the price of a gasoline or diesel, a small consumer generator.
Yeah, it is. And in fact, in the long run, we anticipate, the market research would suggest is probably our bigger units will be slightly more expensive to buy than a diesel generator, but much cheaper to operate. So even without having solar, just simply charging the battery from the grid and taking it with you would still be a fraction of the cost of running a diesel generator. And surprisingly, it's actually better on the environment. Our grid, thankfully, is making some improvements.
Yeah. No, I mean, I went out and bought a generator once after we had 2 power failures in a row that lasted multiple days. And I thought, you know what? We can't keep living like this. And I thought, of course, what will I do after the gas runs out? So delighted that there's that there's this consumer friendly renewable source. That's exciting. So that's available from the Growing Green website.
Yeah, so just grengen.com or growinggreener.ca. We actually are really excited. We're hopefully, and I'm not going to give a specific date, but let's say within 15 months, we're hopefully going to be releasing our first residential product. So this one will do, I guess, probably some of the best features are, of course, it's backup. So when the power goes out, you don't run out of power. The power is going to keep going. It's a natural, uninterrupted power supply. So the app would give you a little alert to let you know it's gone out, so that you might choose to not do the dishwasher and run the laundry at the same time, but you could. So that'd be part of it. The other part is around time of use management. So there's actually quite a lot of savings that comes from planning when you use electricity. So the way that this works, and for a lot of people in Ontario, for example, they would have time of use. Instead of worrying about trying to plan when you use your electricity, the battery system takes care of it for you. So effectively what it does is it loads itself up when the electricity is cheap and using the most renewables. And then you use from the battery when it would be expensive and when they're using most peaker plants, which are really bad on the environment. And the difference in emissions is huge. It's absolutely huge. So even in such a simple way, even without adding a single solar panel, you actually can have a pretty impressive impact on lowering your carbon footprint by avoiding that peaker plant time.
Very cool. So tell us how the Grengen actually works. Do you just put it in the sunshine and let her rip?
So a tiny bit more, but not by much. So you, if you're outside and you want to use it for camping, you just plug in the solar panel. It's literally a single plug, and turn it on. Plug stuff in. So when we say plug and play, we mean, full on plug and play.
And the solar panel, I take it, it's not one that goes on the roof. This is a portable one you carry with you.
Yeah, sometimes they're called solar blankets. They just fold up. It's about the size of a laptop, but a bit thicker. So you just fold it out and the cable runs from the solar panel to the Grengen, and that's it.
This sounds so bloody simple. Why has no one done this before?
You know what? I think in the solar generator category, there are some companies that have started in the last few years, and it's becoming more popular. But in the bigger sense, in the patented part of our technology, it really comes down to, I think, two factors. One, I think that people get caught inside the box. We have grid. We must extend grid. That's how we get power. So you get the really kind of specific sort of mindset that sometimes it doesn't let you see new innovation. The other part is, for a lot of businesses, they don't need to expand or change what they're doing because they're already at full capacity for their demand. I mean, the demand on batteries right now is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it's going through the roof. In fact, the Tesla Powerwall 2 has pulled out of Canada temporarily because they can't meet the demand. You can only get it in the US and only if you buy it with solar panels.
The flip side of that, though, is that we are getting better batteries and heavier and ones that can help us drive more than 200 kilometers without the car stopping in the middle of the desert. How does that affect you, the fact that battery technology is still so vibrant and increasingly productive?
So actually, it's been great for us. There's kind of two parts. A lot of people think of batteries as kind of one large piece, but there's really kind of two parts to it. One is cell development, which is, are you building a lithium iron phosphate battery, or are you building a cell, or are you building a lithium ion with cobalt? So cell production. Batteries are much more focused on the electronics and the flow of the electricity between the cells. So we are on the battery side versus the cell side. So as all the chemistry work that's being done, all of those advancements, they're great. Somebody else does the work and we get to buy those cells and turn them into cool battery systems. So it's been great for us in that regard.
Okay, so what are your hopes regarding this product? Are you trying to come up with new and different devices that will work in sort of more distant, more remote locations? Is that the focus, or
well, definitely
do you really want to own the camping market?
My hopes definitely include not being so broke as an entrepreneur often is. We're starting to turn that corner, so definitely one of my hopes. Actually, the camping market is definitely there, but it's not probably our primary market. I think we really will be focusing a little bit more on the residential and then those foreign markets where we have remote communities and so forth, energy poverty.
Right. And the residential markets, so that's not the emergency generator that I bought and stored at the back of the garage. This is something that we'd use every day to help reduce our dependence on the grid?
Yeah, and it will replace that diesel backup generator as well for a certain period of time. Obviously, if the grid is out, if you're charging it only from the grid and the grid is out for an extended period of time, eventually you run out. But for most people, outages only last, I think the average is somewhere between 1 and 2 hours or less. So you'd have no problem with those kind of outages. If it's for a week, you're going to need something else. You're going to need something supplementary. I'm kind of thinking like we build a cable to attach it to an exercise bike.
No, it sounds amazing. So you've created a company that is going to help with sustainability, to help sustainable development around the world. How important is sustainability to you, and do you demonstrate it in the business?
Yeah, I'd say it's incredibly important to us. I'd say the only thing more important in terms of business is I am a humanitarian than environmentalist. And by that, I mean my primary goals involve helping those folks in those remote areas that are most impoverished. The second, and not by far, would be the environmental impact. And we do take it quite serious in our office. We're really pretty much paperless. Everything is digital. We try and be really good about, organics and recycling and all of the things that we can do to lower our footprint as just general day stuff, but also looking at how do we deal with it in our supply chain so that we can lower our overall carbon footprint.
Right. Is the company, though, are you trying to build it as a model of sustainability?
Yeah. So one of the things, and this is kind of a really unique thing to what we do, I've never seen another battery company that does this. But what happens right now in the world with batteries is, so a battery might have 68 cells. If one cell fails, the whole battery is thrown out. But with ours, we don't actually weld all the battery cells together. They're individually connected to electronics so that we know exactly what cell fails when and where, and from thousands of miles away, because it's Internet of Things connected. So if there is a battery that requires servicing, we replace a single cell, not an entire battery.
That's very cool. Now, do I need that engineer next door to do that, or how does that actually happen?
The plan at this the plan at this point will be that it would be serviced by us. So you would just pop in a spare, because that's how plug and play it is. You just snap it in, send us your original battery, and we would service it. Or we would upcycle it in different ways. So cells can be then used in recycling purposes. So the end of life of a cell is technically at 80% of its life, which means it actually has quite a bit of life left. But we don't guarantee it past that, right? That's the industry standard. So there's a lot of uses for those batteries once they hit the end of life in their commercial aspect.
Sounds to me like you've been encountering barriers and leaping right over them throughout most of your career and possibly your life. You were mentioned recently in an article on how COVID is shifting federal aid programs to small business, and you were sort of expressing some concern that, hey, maybe they'll get around to getting it right. Can you speak to the barriers that continue to exist for LGBTQ entrepreneurs across Canada beyond COVID?
Yeah, so I think COVID has been something that's hit a lot of people, women in particular. But in terms of kind of the broader picture, being an LGBT entrepreneur, or even just a worker, has some challenges. I mean, we have this attitude that we've come so far, and we have, but we still have a long ways to go. And a lot of it is actually around the unconscious bias rather than conscious bias. And I'm old enough to remember a day when it was before gay marriage was legalized. It was even before it was decriminalized in parts of the world. And there's still plenty of places where it's criminal, by the way. In fact, for a lot of people, I'll bet that they were alive in 1990 when the World Health Organization declassified homosexuality as a mental disorder. Wow. 1990 is not actually long ago.
I did not know that. That's incredible.
Yeah, and and in Canada, we're very fortunate that the government and the general belief is that it should be accepted. In fact, when you look at there's all sorts of maps that show kind of acceptance levels and laws in different places. In Canada, the acceptance level is around 85%. So it's pretty solid. It's not 100%, but it's definitely pretty solid. Other parts of the world is a very, very different story. There's still 69 countries in the world that have laws against homosexuality, 9 countries that criminalize any form of gender expression. So if you're a girl who likes to dress like a boy, they're not too happy about that, or vice versa. And there's 7 countries that still have the death sentence. And the death sentence, in some cases, death by stoning.
Oh my gosh.
Like we forget, because that's not what we live with here. But in major parts of the world, I mean, and it might sound like the extreme, but lots of them have whipping and lashes, stoning, imprisonment, admission to psychiatric hospitals, huge fines, life imprisonment in some cases. And the wording is really a language of hate. When you really look at the laws in some countries, it's unnatural offenses and serious or gross indecency, against the order of nature. Debauchery. Personally, I think we should keep debauchery, because my weekends are really boring. Let's keep that one up. But a lot of the language is really around hate. And there's a lot of places where it's not safe for me to travel. Even if the laws are not specifically opposed to homosexuality, sometimes the attitudes are.
Is there an overlap between the countries where you would not want to travel to and where your solution of portable power, plug and play, is needed?
Boy,
there is.
Yes, there is, actually. One of the areas in particular that I traveled to a few years ago was Indonesia. And Indonesia, the acceptance rate is 9%. And I went to that country and I couldn't safely use public bathrooms. I felt unsafe. Like I thought I'd be attacked. So I had to plan my days around when I could be at my hotel to use the bathroom. And on the same trip, I had been just the week before in India, where I was speaking at the Canada India Tech Summit, and I got chased out of the 5-star hotel bathroom by the staff because a short-haired woman clearly is in the wrong place. So there were a lot of things that have, been really difficult. And one of the things, thinking on a business level that was particularly tough was a couple of years later, I needed to return to Indonesia. I had a consultant that we'd hired who didn't turn out as effective as we wanted. And I needed to collect some equipment from him. And I wanted to follow up with the contacts we'd made there and make sure we didn't lose that momentum. And I was kind of starting to plan my trip. And one of the advisors I was working with at the time said, "Connie, you can't go." And I said, "What are you talking about, Bob?" And he said, "If this guy really wants to mess with you, he can get you arrested."
Not for your behavior, but for your mindset?
Being gay.
Yeah.
For being gay. Yeah. So and because some of those laws are so vague, how you dress and types of behaviors, it's really quite vague. So somebody really can throw you in jail for just about anything. And, we forget, there are so many different kinds of discrimination and things that happen in the world, and all of them, quite frankly, make me sick. But we forget sometimes, because Canada is so inclusive for the most part, that's just not the case in a lot of places. I remember landing in India and standing in the immigration line, and this woman turned around, and she was probably five people in front of me, and she glared at me like if the floor could have swallowed me up and dropped me into hell. That's what she was aiming for. And you could see it on her face. Well, why? And to me, this really comes into a much bigger topic around how we dress. I mean, after all, she didn't actually know I was gay. She's just making some assumptions based on the fact that I wear more gender neutral clothes or men's clothes sometimes. I have short hair. I don't wear makeup. So she treated me that way.
And that's the scary part, is that anyone could be targeted on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And whereas by contrast, my wife, who tends to dress much more like, your typical Canadian woman, and she wears makeup and she's much more feminine in her dress and appearance. But quite frankly, she's not less gay, I can assure you. She's just as gay as I am, but she gets treated quite a bit differently. So a lot of it really does come down to how we look. And that really is a much broader problem, because that comes to, all sorts of things in feminism, as well as on the opposite side, like men who are too effeminate in their dress. That's not fair either. So I think we have to look at the bigger picture on how we look at people. After all, I remember, this is completely aside from LGBT issues. I was driving through Edmonton, and we have a really eclectic group of people in Edmonton, and I love it. And we happened to pass by someone who was dressed in very kind of 50s style, dress. A woman, and it was kind of one of those poodle skirts, I guess, that kind of thing. I thought, wow, that looks so cool. And the person beside me in the car was like, "Oh my God." And I went, why are you judging this person because she's different? I thought she looked cool. But the person beside me judged her, and not in a positive way.
In Canada, we tend to think that we're, more accepting. You said we're 85% of the way. What needs to be done in Canada to help ensure, equality and acceptance for everybody?
Well, I think more people have to be advocates, particularly in business. Government can go so far, but business has a responsibility to show leadership. And there have been some great examples. CGLCC, the Canadian Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, they have done a wonderful job with the bringing on kind of this supplier diversity program, which I think is brilliant, and helps get people indoors that have previously been rather closed. You still have to have the best product and the best price and all that, but you finally can get in the door. But part of it comes on the opposite end, where those corporate companies, big companies, are showing support, showing that their employees, that their suppliers, that every part of their life is inclusive, not just making sure that a bathroom in one building is. It's got to be much more inclusive all the way through, from every part of buying parts to finishing with their customer service. And we've seen some great examples. I know EY has been terrific. They have been unbelievably supportive to me. And we basically work with them, but they do it because it's the right thing to do. In fact, that's how I got my VP finance was a recommendation from an EY colleague.
Do you think that there are specific things that businesses could be doing more of in order to be allies and to promote this diversity and equity that some of us believe is so important?
Well, hopefully some of us is a lot of us. Yeah, you know what? I think that there are a lot of specific things. One is being part of those supplier diversity programs. I think it's great. And again, it's not some kind of handout. They're not grants. It's just an opportunity to meet with buyers. And that's a great thing. It doesn't impact their business negatively. If anything, it impacts their business positively. And all of the other things, including, support of different families at work and the rights. Like paternal leave should not still be a question in some places, and yet it's not expected. There's a lot of places where it just, even the forms, right? Your paper forms say, what's your husband's name? You scratch it out and put
right.
Partner or spouse, right? And, they're simple things, but they're things that in the long run create an environment that is supportive.
And are there sources you could recommend for people for businesses, entrepreneurs, or big businesses to consult in order to not just